Welcome back. I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avocet Integrated Marketing, and we are so excited to talk all things creative today. Obviously, a passion of ours. Achilles LaGrav. Yay, third time's a charm, right? Achilles LaGrav of Exclamation Point Ventures, and Mike Howard, which is much easier to pronounce, of Daughters and Howard, are joining forces with us today to share their insights into how entrepreneurs and startups can promote and maintain impactful marketing creative in an era of remote work. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I tell you, as I said, I love this topic. Creativity, we're seeing a resurgence in creativity in the world of marketing right now. Digital has changed so much of the landscape because people have the mindset, oh, it will just take you 5 minutes to get that out. Just do it. Just get it out. Just get it out. So I'm really excited not only to talk about how we manage remote workers from a creative standpoint, but really the essence of creativity and its importance today. Before we get there, we'll go ahead and start with you, Mike. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
My journey. My name is Mike Howard. I'm a creative director and a writer, a copywriter. I'm in the advertising industry. Have been for 21 years at this point. I've worked primarily with agencies, Arnold in Boston, Arnold Worldwide, and Crispin Porter McGusky, which is here in Boulder, was here in Boulder until just recently. And I started with them in Miami years and years and years ago. And now I currently am, I guess you can call me a gig employee or freelancer. And I work with lots of agencies all over the country on primarily on just large general market brands, things you would have heard of. I started out on the Truth Anti-Tobacco campaign, which would have been something you would recognize from the early aughts, I suppose. It was a very sort of like lauded, wonderful public service campaign that accomplished some wonderful goals. Volkswagen, Burger King, Target, Starbucks, you name it, lots of different categories, but I've worked on them all.
That's great.
I'm enjoying myself.
Yeah.
Exciting stuff. Achilles?
I'm Achilles LaGrav, and I'm currently managing partner at Exclamation Point, which is just a little family office, but spent my career in entrepreneurship and digital transformation and working at the intersection of media, data, and technology, most recently founding Brandsuka down in Boulder, which is a programmatic media buying platform.
Yeah, which we love. So we've got a wide variety of people listening today. Some of them are truly in startup mode. Some of them may be in business for 5 years, and then we've got some people that have just been around a long time and they've got established businesses. And so I want to go get to basics here for a minute, so that we're covering everyone's point of view really on the importance of creative, which is a key point here. What we see with a lot of startup brands is that they feel the product is going to sell itself. And they talk about what it does and how they do it, but they really push the emotional side of marketing aside. And that's where creativity comes into play, right? That emotional epiphany that we create with our audience so that they notice what it is that we're selling. Why do you feel so many startup brands push the need for creative aside when we all, we're creative ambassadors, right? It's what we do day in and day out when we know that there's the importance of it.
Sure, I absolutely can. I think entrepreneurs and business owners, large and small, know that their businesses and their products and services are only as good as the amount of effort and attention that they put into it. So to your point, there's oftentimes an interesting dissonance between the amount of care that an intention that they invest across their business, which sometimes doesn't match within their marketing and creative. And I think that's largely because when we talk about creative, we're talking about a space that's so broad in terms of expertise, skill set, and need, and it's really hard sometimes for business owners who are already wearing every other hat to be able to transact that space successfully.
Right. And just understanding the need for it. You live day in and day out of creating ideas that helps products and solutions and good ideas sell, quite frankly. What advice do you have to the audience today regarding the importance of creative as a part of their strategy?
Well, to your original question, it's funny because it kind of does depend on the startup. I know there's a gentleman that I speak to every now and then back in Boston who has a small agency who worked with startups quite a bit until at some point he decided that he would not anymore. And the reason why he wouldn't anymore is, and I think it was maybe like overly aggressive in his part, but he decided that he was basically working for his own competition. And I think in the very best case, I mean, I think when we were working with the gentleman who founded Geek Squad, like his quote, and I'm going to butcher it, is something to the effect of that advertising is the tax you pay for being uncreative as a business person. And I think there's a lot of validity to that. Another sort of anecdote where that's concerned, I worked briefly for a small startup running apparel company that's getting a lot of traction at this point in time. Absolutely no pun intended there. But what was wonderful is the gentleman who started it had such a clear vision for the things that he wanted to do that it was really difficult to get in front of him from a creative perspective. I mean, coming up with run apparel, generally speaking, is more maybe like you're in the fashion industry, so it's a bit more of a creative endeavor to begin with.
Right.
But a lot of the things you'll encounter with, I've encountered anyway with startups, is that they've got so much baked into their idea from the get-go that it's hard to, it would be hard to nudge them out in any regard into another area or just convince them that those ideas might be wrong-minded in any way. And a lot of times they are right. So I guess I'm giving credit where credit's due to some of the people who start these companies for kind of like having a clear vision for it. Having the vision to pivot at some point in time into what like their realities might be, that's a whole other story.
Right.
And so I guess that's by way of saying too that creative isn't necessarily an advertising endeavor in my mind anyway. But can be part of the product from the very get-go. And that's where I see maybe the biggest importance.
Yeah,
quite frankly.
that
It's
differentiation.
an interesting point that you're putting your finger on. I had the experience firsthand from the extreme other side of being the entrepreneur early in my entrepreneurial career of just feeling in my bones that I knew how to market and sell the business. Well, what I learned was I knew how to market and sell the business to me, right? And I was already in the business. So the skill set of actually projecting out that business into your prospective communities and prospective pools of customers was a whole different skill set that I didn't have. So from my logo, I love my logo, and I see this with entrepreneurs and business owners who like develop an identity really early on.
I have my logo tattooed on my arm. Literally. Sorry.
You better never change that logo.
No, it's nice because it relates to my family anyway.
Oh, I
Daughters
love
and
it.
the name of my company, and I won't not have daughters.
Yeah.
And my last name will not be Howard, and that's maybe a good thing from a creative perspective to take into account is the longevity there.
I love it.
Design's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
From the get-go.
Yeah, and Achilles on that point as well. So you're really talking about internal audiences yourself versus your external audience, right? And I think that is one of the lines in the sand where most marketers get it wrong. They're talking about, how it works, and they don't get, again, to the emotional epiphany about what it's going to take to sell the product. And that's where, outside of some of the product development side of things, creativity really comes into play. Mike, talk us through, some of the brands that you've worked with and some of the very established brands. It doesn't matter if it's an entrepreneurial brand, if it's startup, or if it's very established. We have those discussions with our clients every single day. This is more internal culture. We need to focus on the external audience.
Interesting. I'll maybe talk about a case where the two meet.
Good.
Back many years ago, I'll say 2005, I was working on the launch of the relaunch of the Volkswagen GTI here in the United States of America.
Fun.
Extremely popular car for Volkswagen, always has been. They had many iterations. This was the Mark V, so it'd be the fifth Mark for them. The first and second were the most popular with their enthusiasts. And what happened was they had a product manager who was an enthusiast himself, and he was really fun and like really animated, extremely geeky. But could flip the pedal and stuff like that. It was like that kind of a like driver's driver dude. And when he was talking to us about the thing, like his level of animation when he was talking about things like I'm forgetting the name of the paddle shifting mechanism, but there was a sort of like rocket boost feature or some baloney like that. But he got so animated that he started swearing in front of all of us. And what was cool was there were details, like every little thing was. It was the cloth on the seats that was a specific kind of plaid that harkened back to the original. Like the shifter had like dimples in it, like a golf ball, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, you had this guy who was an enthusiast, who was the product manager for a car that was built for enthusiasts, and then we have to come up with sort of like an idea that, it could speak to I guess anybody really, but the sort of I think like the kind of creative epiphany or. I hesitate to call it an epiphany whatsoever. It was just like if you could appeal to a group of geeks and enthusiasts, then they can go ahead and be their own media. So you can sort of like amplify that media like severalfold, especially in a situation where like you've got someone who is as enthusiastic about that as like a Trekkie would be about Star Trek. And so what we did was at the time we created a lot of stuff that was like directed very specifically at that particular market of people. We created like a sort of like a collectible figurine doll thing that we called the Fast, and the campaign was called Make Friends with Your Fast. But the doll in and of itself was the type of thing that you would go to at the time it was like Kid Robot, you'd go and like collect that type of thing. But it appealed to the same like level of
it's those trekkers that that become that audience for you.
Exactly. So what I guess to your point, the original question or the original line of questioning was that all the stuff that this gentleman who was the product manager had sort of baked into his like car because he was an enthusiast was the same stuff that would appeal to the external group of people that could be their external market.
Yeah, and recognizing that is key. I again, just staying on this dialogue here for a second, audience segmentation becomes something very, very important, and an area that really can become a little bit scientific, quite frankly, when it comes to developing the words and the imagery that is so important to appeal to those audiences. Do you have a specific process that no matter what you're going to go to when it comes to determining what that audience is so that it's the right audience?
That's interesting. First of all, I'm a big data fan. And it's funny that we know each other from, we got to know each other when Achilles was first pitching the brand new idea.
Yeah.
And I didn't know much about data at that point in time where sort of like ad tech is concerned. And over the years, I've become a real big believer in some strange things that feel sort of, they feel blasphemous to creatives in a way, like just the way communication is structured. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your original question.
Oh, it's just some of the audience segmentation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
A lot of times, to be frank, we're fed that by a strategist or whatever. But I think over the years, and hopefully it doesn't even take that long, is that a creative has a strategic, lots of strategic bones in their body actually, and starts to think about like the realities surrounding like, well, I have a life. I am of a certain age. I have a certain amount of children. I have a wife. We buy things. If I'm paying attention, there should be some like instinct involved in that, but then the instinct moves over to a place like.
No, this is an area I'm it's one of my mainline passions. So I started what feels like ages ago, back in the traditional media days, right? Where audience segmentation and data were really hard to come by.
Yeah.
Now, that's been so democratized, and the question is, what do we mean about data, and how does a business owner gain that data on a product that hasn't launched yet? And that's where technology really comes in, and that's one of the interesting tensions that we played and built into Brainsuka, because the reality is today you can experiment and develop that data at very, very low risk for the business. So one of the things that
use an example, because the examples are really good. Your examples.
Yeah. So one of the things that, for example, we eventually were doing with Crispin Porter was allowing them to develop different ideas in terms of creative and messaging, and actually putting them out into the wild across quite varied audiences at every level: geography, psychography, and demographics, and then just seeing how those were performing,
how they're pulling
on the way back, and then that data then informing people like Mike at the creative level as to what were the areas to really lean on.
And
what's
you can't
resonating,
argue
what's not.
As a creative, you can argue, but you would be arguing with science and like really good data. It's funny, I work direct to client with Facebook, and I'm working with Google currently quite a bit. But like their level of like the ability that they have, that a Google has, just bounce it. Yeah,
it's
let's
right
try
there.
3 ways.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's do each one, and then we'll do it for a week and see what happens. Which is basically what Achilles does on a micro and macro level, I guess, or what Brainsuka did, I suppose. But yeah, their ability to just bounce that off, and it's funny too because it rubs off on you. I don't know why you just try it both ways, which is like again from a creative perspective, once upon a time was blasphemous because you're ceding a certain amount of like creative authority or creative expertise. Which I mean, I rolled my eyes when I say that, but we're at a point now where I think if you're not acknowledging that reality of data, then you're just sort of, you have your head in your sand, in the sand from a creative perspective.
Yeah, I agree. And people love good creative. They want to, it's what sparks interest, but it's also what provides them, it could provide them peace of mind. It could provide them a spark of energy. It could be an aha moment for them regarding something new or different. I mean, there's so many psychological reasons why people want to see good creative. But most creative is not good creative. A lot of it just isn't seen. A lot of it just gets pushed aside because it either looks like everything else out there, or it doesn't have that spark that really ignites interest from the viewer, or from someone just sitting down reading, whatever it might be. What makes good creative good?
That's really funny because we were just talking about that in the green room or whatever before this. It kind of depends on your definitions of good and your definitions of creative, which I stole that from you, like blatantly stole that from you.
It's awesome.
But I think there's it's true. There's efficacy on the good side, and there's watchability on the other side, and it depends what media you're in, and it depends what creative is. And it's funny because the example I sort of just threw to Achilles while we were talking about this was a gajillion years ago when the iPod Nano first came out. Like their commercials, their TV commercials, which were, you can argue whether or not we're beyond that a bit, but it was great because all the good creative was built into the object itself, and that continues to be the case for all Apple products, I think.
Yeah.
And so all you have to do is show it.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting is as creative people in advertising, we look at you don't have a Mac. Do you have a MacBook Air? No.
But I do. I mean, we've got all those. Yeah.
So the MacBook Air commercial was the MacBook Air. The original one was the MacBook Air being slid into a manila envelope. Yeah. Which is a complete product feature ad. Like there's nothing more in the ad except this is really thin. Yeah. It's a really thin computer, and it shows you, it proves how thin it is by demonstrating it. It's a product demo, and I think honestly, that's kind of where from a personal perspective, I think that that's where the sweet spot is, right?
Mhm.
Like if you've got a thing that's so good that you can just product demo it.
Well, and that situation, the audience creates their own story.
Exactly.
And they, the product then is magnetic to them, and that's what you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what I find also is having a shared understanding on what the key metric defining good, great, or successful is really necessary. I think of the big advertising award shows, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, okay, so you won a Cannes Lion for this video, but did it really perform?
Did it work? Yeah.
Did it actually work?
Yeah.
So to me, good creative is creative that actually performs, and it leads me back to an example. I remember we ran some spots for Truth, and the creatives wanted to validate their creative decisions in the production and final cut of a video, which they loved, and they specifically loved a scene in that video. And when we ran it, we realized that there was a huge drop-off in audience engagement
At that scene.
and we could track it down to that specific scene, and being able to validate through audience reaction that a scene that was beloved by the creative director was not beloved by the entire audience, and being able to address that, I think, are the practices that
I think it's really interesting. Sorry, I'm just going to elaborate a little bit on that. Like, as a creative who's seen sort of the results from some of the things that Achilles and his mechanisms do, from a data perspective, it's really fascinating and humbling, and in a way that you understand being in advertising anyway. But basically, it's. I mean, I'll boil it down to a graph of engagement that will go precipitously down from second one. So like, we've all experienced this. We see pre-roll advertising on any video. We see the ad before the ad that we're watching online. And basically like the engagement metric is something that just goes, the curve goes straight down. Now degrees of how precipitously that falls, that's success. Yeah. I mean, like if you hold out for another, split second or another 2 split seconds, like those things make a massive difference. And like, whether or not like you could draw conversion metrics or I can't even call them really metrics. Can I? Like implications, conversion implications, I guess, from those particular things. That's one thing or another. But again, we're talking about degrees of failure. Like it's almost, you're always going to fail. Yeah. It's just the degree to which you do can be less or greater. And then you have to sort of come to terms with that as an ego. Yeah. I think.
Well, it's why you better know what you're selling up front too.
Yes. Yes.
It's, we used to refer to this, we had an incredible creative director who started the agency, and he referred to this as creative for creative's sake. Yes. At the end of seeing the ad or interacting with it, you have no idea what you're selling. You have no idea what the product is. You have no idea who the company is behind it. And that's when creative does not work. But it makes us feel great because it's a really good idea. It's not working.
Funny example where that's concerned. I'll just throw this out there mostly because I don't see ads often. And I think that more and more, like if you're being really honest with yourself, it's hard to find advertising because we avoid it so actively anyway. But now there's so many ways to avoid it. So one of the things that recently we've been doing during this pandemic is, as a family, we've been watching like Modern Family or like The Office, like as a family, the entirety of the series. Yeah. And some of the places where you can find those things have ads built into them. And shout out to all of my friends who do the progressive ads. Great job, because my kids can all recite it now. But it's like the idea is the don't become your dad idea, stuff, which is really, fantastic and super recallable. Everyone knows it's progressive. Everyone knows what's being sold there. But it's funny, like I was around during the period of time when they were starting to develop that idea, and it was like, it took many, many years to get it to where it was, and they were trying to sell it in different ways. But the notion underlying it all was that if you are, there's data to support this, that if you have, if your parents have an insurance company, you will tend to, once you get your own insurance company, just get that insurance company because you were on it to begin with, and da-da-da-da. Like there's all this like, to push somebody out of like their parents' insurance company is a big deal. You look at the idea now, it's got absolutely nothing to do with that. It's just
Right.
a fun place to start that idea. And it literally, I don't know that, like, if you dissect it, there's no way to see what that original idea was, but
Right.
people all know what's selling, you know?
Well, they do, and certainly validating that on the bottom, or really, we're in charge of top line revenue, right?
Mhm.
Validating that, in top line revenue is what it's all about. I want to talk a little bit about when you've got a creative concept and it's going to work, it's going to sell, but the client's just not ready for it. How do you navigate those waters, either to convince them that it's going to work? Certainly A/B testing, some of the things in your wheelhouse can go a great way to do that. But there are a lot of great clients who ruin great creative.
Yeah, to a certain extent, and I attach to that question in a kind of a different way, and that is how many times I've known in my bones and soul that the market was craving something.
That idea.
Something that once you take it out there, the market isn't reacting to in the way that you expected.
And how you come to terms with that.
Yeah.
And that really speaks to the necessity to have agility in terms of updating your systems of beliefs to present circumstances
Right.
as that data comes in. We were talking about an example about the Honda Element,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
That was a great case study and very much aligning with reality. When that car was introduced, I believe in 2004, Honda went out and did a bunch of research, and they found that this car was just going to be an absolute hit with those millennials
Yeah.
who had their first professional job and were able to get in that car and go up to the mountains or the beach or Baja
And be
California.
green about it.
They put it out there, and they were not interested. They wanted the GTI and the little fast whip. And who ended up buying the car was 55-year-old
Isn't that crazy?
guys, right?
Yeah.
So,
And communication has to change at that point. Lots of things have to change.
yeah, well, they did a bad job at
Yeah.
that, right? They kind of stuck with their creative, believing
Yeah.
that their research was going to get them there, and they eventually withdrew the car after some years.
So that, I think, is an example where strategy can fail creative as well.
Mm-hmm.
And which is another key point here, because the research is only good if it can truly be validated, and if it's right. And sometimes research gets pushed through a funnel to affirm what you want to believe versus what you should believe. How have you navigated these situations as creatives where you feel some additional research might need to be done to really launch the product or launch the idea with the right information on hand so that you do come up with good concepts?
So I think, first of all, I just to take one half step back is like, I think knowing you're right is, or feeling in your bones you're right, I think is probably is incredibly wrong-minded, is certainly for creative, because I think there's a couple things, right? And I've learned this from mentors over the years. This isn't my original thought or whatever, but I think that if you can't think of another creative idea, you are bad
Oh
creative.
yeah, you should be flowing.
Yeah, and if like you can't continue to keep thinking of another creative idea, you are an incredibly bad creative. Like
Yeah.
it just, and so you've got to sort of like, it's like a challenge. Like, you don't like that idea. I got 20 more of them. That's fine. You know what I mean? That being said, the strategic question you were just talking about, I think in great agency relationships, there is a realization at some point. A lot of them, there was this one, actually, I'll credit it. The CMO of Verizon has this great bit. He's from Venezuela. And he does this bit where he'll go through, he's really, really meticulous, and he you have to go through a lot to like make him happy. And eventually what ends up happening is like you've gone through and tweaked according to the strategy to a point where his saying is like, it feels like a bad golf swing.
Oh.
Like, and he's absolutely right. Like, it's like you've overanalyzed every single piece of it. And by the way, acknowledges his own role in that. Like,
Absolutely.
I have pushed you to analyze each separate piece of that golf swing to the point that you can't naturally feel the swing anymore, and you're completely shanking it every time. So, and I'm not a golfer, but I think it's a really good point, and speaks to a really good relationship when you can stop for a moment and be like, you know what, we're just not hitting it here, and it's not because of anything you guys are necessarily doing. It's because we've got to go back and rethink what we're trying to say here.
And I love that point, because a lot of clients are just so excited, and we don't want to disappoint, right?
Right.
And you present the big idea or a couple ideas, and when it falls flat, and sometimes it should fall flat, and sometimes we just need to, sell it a little bit more, whatever it might be, that emotionally, as the account team, as the strategist behind it, as a creative director, that can be very, very hard to overcome. What advice do you have for marketers being able to deliver that message? No, it's flat. And for those individuals receiving that message.
I can speak to that from the being the client side.
Yeah.
And one thing that you have to ask yourself, which I learned the hard way, is, am I being a good client? Right?
Yeah.
And to be a good client, you need to have the openness to listen to the hard, unvarnished feedback from the professionals you're engaging with.
Right.
I mean, it's interesting to me how different the framework was for me in being in a doctor's office and having the doctor present me data and scientific background around a complex system that I know I don't fully understand, although I live with it. Whereas in a similar situation with
we're all good at it, right? Everyone's a good creative, right?
Or everybody believes
Everyone's a
they are.
copywriter as well.
Everyone's a copywriter, and that's, I think, fine. We all know English. We all took it in high school or whatever.
Yeah. But, so, it's sometimes you just want to end up engaging in a conversation where you have your own belief structure validated by somebody else. And if that's the relationship that you want, that's going to be a bad relationship, because you're either going to end up with creatives who give up and say, hey, listen, we'll tell you whatever you want to hear.
That's exactly right. I think it's about motivations.
It is.
Like, ultimately, it's about how do you motivate people, and that goes for leaders in the startup space,
does.
and it goes for people as they're having relationships with I guess you'd call us a vendor too,
Well,
or a partner, I suppose.
And the example that you used with Verizon, I think, which prompted the question, is a really good one. There are very, very seasoned, CMOs out there that absolutely believe in the agency. They believe in the creative at the table. They know that they can come up with the idea, and it's not always a home run out of the chute. And then there are people out there that expect the home run out of the chute. Creative is it's a moving organism. You know what I mean? It's constantly evolving and growing, and sometimes becoming its own thing. Good creative. And when you are selecting who you want to work with and who you don't want to work with, I think that's a key component. Are they here to see us win, or are they here to just move on to the next agency?
Or is one a factor of your relationship, because you can establish that, I think, and again, sort of to your audience in the startup space, like, that's about, look, you can beat someone in submission and they'll still deliver. They'll deliver what you want, or you can get somebody excited about it. And I think, like, it's what's interesting is, like, opportunity is an incredible motivator. Like, we were talking yesterday, there's a great saying about like, you can get it fast, cheap, or what's the other one? Good, fast, cheap, or good. And you can only choose two.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the classic equation or triangle or whatever. But I think the other thing is like opportunity, like what that buys you from a startup perspective, like is what is worth its weight in gold in lots of ways. Like I know as a gig worker, like if I can see very clearly that a project might be an opportunity, my price tag goes down precipitously, like quickly, because like we've got to support ourselves and we've got to do what we've got to do. But at the end of the day, like if a continued sense of relevance and a continued sense of like enthusiasm for what you do, it's like a thank you.
It really is.
It's worth money in the bank. And so I think like establishing, and again, going back to the audience here, just establishing that kind of a relationship where like, yeah, it's your company. Definitely. I mean, there's no like ifs, ands, or buts about it, but like acknowledging the fact that if you like, give a creative a little bit like of rope to run with, you might get magic out of that.
Yeah.
Like that might be an incredible thing. There's, how much did they pay for the Nike logo?
Yeah.
I think it was like $30 or something.
Well, I know, it's interesting. The gig economy, you've mentioned it a couple times, and it has changed so much, and how, companies go to market. And whether you are an internal agency, an outside agency, someone in, marketing, tech, or whatever it might be, the need for creative is always there. How you obtain and hire creative is what has really, really changed. Our own creative director lives in South Dakota. And so not only do you not need everyone in the office every day of the week, but a lot of creative is coming out of remote working, whether it be a full-time employee or a gig worker. How did you know that you wanted to really leave quote unquote day-to-day agency life and become, a very sought after gig worker? Those are my words, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
You bet.
I'm very sought after. For me, it's funny. Achilles and I were just having this conversation the other day about like the entrepreneurial instinct that comes from like sort of exhausting what you feel are your choices.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because I think we both felt it, but it's something that remains unvoiced a lot. It's like, you hear like how I started this with Guy Raz or whatever the name of that podcast is, and it's like a lot of times you hear people be like, we sat down and we wanted to start a business, and like we thought about it, and then we thought, let's do kombucha. And it's like, really? That's how you started a business? So like, in my particular case, it was an exhaustion of circumstances. It was one of those things where you kind of look around and you go like, all right, well, I've done this and learned that from these people and in this circumstance. And like, what do I want to do now? And what you want to do now is just like, do your own thing kind of. How it applies to our current situation is really great because creativity is so weird and fluid and hard to bill. From an hourly perspective, because you're always thinking about it. All the time.
And moreover, if it takes you an hour to come up with the idea, there's so much more value to it than that, right?
Well, and also too, it never does. And like it's like you're on your bike, you're taking a hike, you're thinking about the
it's
thing.
With you
it's
constantly.
Like, so if I were to bill for it, it'd be a 24-hour billing cycle. I mean, like pretty much, except for the hours I sleep. But like my personal schedule, I don't know if this applies to everybody, but my personal schedule during this period of time has become so exotic. I don't know that I could go back to an office life. Like I wake up at 4 a.m. and get like 8 hours of work in before 12. And then I just have fun for the rest of the day, more or less, which is, I mean, fluid and wonderful. You might take a nap. Like it just wouldn't be acceptable under any other circumstances, but that is kind of how creative goes.
Yeah.
I think I've been hearing a lot of stuff on NPR and stuff about like it's like that. It's the end result idea. Like, and I'm forgetting the companies right now that they're applying it to, but I love that notion. It's like I don't care what you are, where you are, what you're doing. If you get that like sort of like metric filled, you've done your job, and however you want to get to that point, that's what you'll be judged upon.
Yeah, I think it's been an amazing experience this past year at every level. But what I've seen opening up for me as I look and gauge what's happening out there is I've had this notion, and you were just speaking to it, about this false narrative, feels false to me, of the differentiation between work and home life balance, right? If I'm an integrated human being,
It's all the same.
it's all the same.
Right.
I mean, there's not an Achilles that's different here during quote business hours that is different when he goes home, and I have no on and off switch that I can throw where I'm not going to be thinking about the pressures of home life or work life
In either side. Right.
in either side. Now,
Do you think that's more for creatives though? Because there are teams that definitely want to turn it off when they get
Oh
home.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
awesome.
it's just just like no, I'm off.
yeah, I've yet to
and like
actually
business
spend-
ownership, entrepreneurship,
can't
we never
imagine.
turn it off,
I can't
right?
imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've yet to fully validate that person exists.
yeah.
I want it to so bad that I dream about that person.
Yeah,
I really do.
I would love to be that person. But what I've experienced
doesn't
over
exist.
the past, what I've experienced over the past year is with these new frameworks and not abilities, because Zoom has been around for a while,
Sure.
but acceptance.
So the uptake is unbelievable. I've been using it for years.
Yeah.
Not Zoom. I've been using some version of FaceTime
Oh, yeah.
as a freelancer, as a gig worker since 2013, 14,
Yeah.
and like the unwillingness of people to pick it up, and it's like you guys. You don't understand. Like it only takes you a minute to not look at the lens anymore,
Yeah.
like or to worry about your hair and stuff like that. And after that, it's the best thing
Yeah.
you've ever
Yeah,
done.
it
But
is.
where I was going with it
Sorry.
is I am getting work product at all sorts of weird hours,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it can be 11:30 and I get the designs in the middle of the night
Mhm.
or at 4 o'clock in the morning, etc. And it's open up the availability of those, I believe, of those creatives who are thinking in the middle of the night and have an idea of saying like, ooh, I would like to share this right now via Slack rather than waiting until tomorrow when that thought might have escaped.
And I mean, creatives cannot be forced into the confines of an 8 to 5 job. I mean, it's this madman
He
is
can
way it's way behind us, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't turn it off, and you want them to be thinking, you want to be engaging and never turn it off. And I think that I mean, we're the same way. I love that you receive those emails at 11:30 in the evening.
Yeah.
A good friend of mine talks about from a creative perspective, and this is, I think, valid. It's a really valid thing. Is how many truly productive creative hours do you get out of yourself or a colleague per day? And we've boiled it down to 4. It's 4 really truly productive
Yeah.
with a lot of B word. There's a great John Cleese has it's a very long speech, but if you find it on YouTube, it's about his creative process. And there's all kinds of mechanisms he puts into play. I mean, this is one of the most famous creative people in the whole wide world. And it's you need 90 minutes to get out of mode, and then you need to stay there for an hour and a half, and then and it's absolutely insane. But he boils it down to basically that you can't be productive more than an hour and a half at a time before you got to go walk away, and then you got to sit back and it hurts.
Well, and it's, when you're doing nothing, when you're in the shower,
It's
when
not
you're
really
riding
nothing,
the bike, I mean, that's when the epiphanies come to you.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, and that is because you've done all that pre-work, you've relaxed the brain, and now the ideas, it's truly, I think, a phenomenal testament to how the brain works as well.
Now, the other thing about that, though, and I'll add from a client perspective, and especially a startup client perspective, is that a lot of times with startups, because it happens to be in tech, because small startups happen to be tech, you're working with engineers. And engineers, that in my experience, I'm casting sort of broad strokes here, but in my experience, the demand for a regimented process explanation is really high with an engineer. And it's impossible for them to understand what that airy baloney that I just that I just laid on you as being something that's somehow that you can hold on to. And it's I don't know how else to explain it. There are a certain amount of hours in a day, and a day is a really fluid thing.
Yeah.
And they're like, but what's your process? And I'm like, that's my process.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put it. I can give you a menu item of stuff that I do, but you wouldn't be satisfied with that either. And so I think maybe that's a message to the entrepreneurs in your audience is that like, it's just more it can be more nebulous. I mean, like you can regiment it, and that's a good disciplined thing to do.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it is
and they've got to allow it to happen too.
Yep.
So as people are choosing to hire more remote workers, in some situations, it's the only way we can get the work done, right? What is some advice that you have to them looking for a creative that they might want to do either some freelance work or bring on from a contractual standpoint or hire even, as an FTE?
Yeah, I mean, this is the real point of risk, right? Ask yourself, how much do you know about this problem and your ability to triage what the right tool is for the problem you're trying to solve? And if you don't have that, there is huge value to de-risking that equation by going to an integrative agency or such who can actually come in and look and assess what it is you need. I'll give you an example. I was recently working with a consultancy out of Denver, and the founder had a really strong sense, bordering on hubris, on the fact that he'd been hiring engineers his whole life, right? And he could get the right engineer for the right job, and he had brand aspirations that required about 5 or 6 different practices to be filled, which he hoped by contractors, and he kept trying to go out and hire those persons as gig workers. And I remember him calling me very excited one day and saying, "Hey, I found the right person who's going to solve all of these things, because they're a designer and they're a copywriter, and they can also code the website, but they can also assess data coming back from a marketing campaign, and all over the map."
Shotgun.
And I'm thinking, wow. This must be some incredible person, right?
Yeah.
And that person was... No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no. Eventually I jump on an interview of a very nice person who presents me her portfolio, and the first thing that she has on there is the Tesla website, right? Now, I happen to have a level of experience beyond what this entrepreneur could framework. And so my immediate question to her was, okay, are you claiming that you were responsible for the entire Tesla website, or are you saying you were attached to the agency that did that? And if so, what was your role? Right? Well, she was an intern at the time.
Yeah.
Right? So being able to dig deeper and being able to really rely on your network for folks who have that experience and can help you assess the talent before you make those investments is really, really important.
And I think understanding the difference between the concept and implementation, right?
Yeah.
Because the concept is one thing, the implementation is something else. And are you looking at design or the creative idea? And were there 5, a creative director and 5 art directors leading the graphic designer down the path they needed to go?
Yep.
That's hard. We've just got a few additional, probably about 30 seconds here, Mike.
Let me give you one thing before, because I want to be very practical for people who might be watching this. Is there's a resource called Working Not Working out there, and it's WNW. I forget exactly. It's Working Not Working. It was a resource created by creatives for creatives and for people who creatively staff. It is also, I think, relatively browsable without a subscription. A lot of times agencies will be required to get a subscription to see it, but you can get an idea of like, they were all vetted by us, by our community. So you can get a really good idea of like how legitimate that resource you're looking at is if they're on there.
Well, I appreciate that deeply, and I know that our audience does as well. Achilles LaGrav and Mike Howard, you guys have been so inspiring today. Thank you very, very much. And up next, how to get to retirement and survive once you're there. This is a big topic for all of you. We'll see you in a few minutes.